the YouTube video is, so we'll know if screens are shared and stuff like that. Great. All right. Oh, who's ready? Let's party.
I'm ready.
Welcome, everybody, to the Parks and Built Environment Council Committee meeting. Today is March 12th. We're here in council chambers. It's 5 p.m. We have an exciting couple of updates today with some work that's been going on in the community, and then also hopefully can save some time for York to provide a comp plan update and a response to and conversation about collaboration that's happened with the community as well to help prepare for the future and plan accordingly. So today we have our guest presenter, Tina Blasity with LISC, Local Initiative Service Corps, and they've been doing some really great work planning ahead for, I don't want to spoil your presentation, but they've been doing some good work in the community to make sure that we're planning ahead for the light rail station. So Tina has a presentation today, but if you want to take a minute to introduce yourself and the organization and the work you've been doing.
Sure. I think part of my introduction is just in the slides, so I'll just go ahead and maybe just jump right in.
Great.
Here we go. Okay. Is that working? Let's see. We gotta close this and this and there we go. All right. Well, thanks for having me here. I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the work that we are doing. The Local Initiative Support Corporation is an affordable housing and economic development organization. We're a national organization with local offices across the country, including an office here in Puget Sound. Our focus is to ensure racial and economic justice by really focusing on affordable housing, economic development, and wealth building opportunities. And one of the projects that we've been working on is here in South Everett. So I'll talk a little bit about that. Our organization overall has a variety of programs across the entire continuum of community and economic development, including health, safety and justice, small business support, income and wealth building, and some of the other things you see here on the screen. All of those things are meant to work together to help build vital and economically just opportunities for folks who live in often under-resourced and disinvested communities. So we've been working with the South Everett community, in particular, the community at Casino Road, for about 3 years in helping to organize the community to articulate its priorities around community and economic development, and to really think about the opportunity that new light rail investment and infrastructure investments present for the community, as well as some of the things that people are nervous about in their community. We've seen that light rail, the arrival of light rail in other communities has sometimes caused displacement. And so wanting to make sure that the folks who currently live in the neighborhood can benefit from those changes. So when we worked with the community to hear what their priorities were, they talked about these 4 areas, which include parks and recreation, making sure that they have access to culturally relevant recreational spaces, a lot of discussion about access to trails and green space. People want to make sure that they have the opportunity to build a better life for themselves through their careers. So making sure that they have access to training programs and opportunities for career ladder jobs. We also want to make sure that we're supporting small businesses because that's such an important part of a community. And we know that in order to do some of those things, we need to make sure that there is organizational capacity where we have community-based organizations that have the ability to take on some of this programming and advocate for the community. And then perhaps most importantly, that we have a variety of housing types and affordable housing that serve people at all levels of income. We know that in South Everett, and particularly along Casino Road, we have a very high concentration of multifamily housing. Much of it is affordable housing, but it's not income restricted housing. So it's affordable just by nature of its age or condition. And those kinds of properties are ripe for speculative real estate speculation with the new light rail coming in, and that is of great concern for the community. So these are some of the activities we've been working on with the community. And then really what we're hoping will be the outcomes of these activities and initiatives are really preventing displacement, helping to support immigrant and businesses owned by people of color, making sure that we have high quality job opportunities for folks, especially given the fact that, you know, there are significant manufacturing jobs in the neighborhood, but that aren't necessarily available currently to the residents of the neighborhood. That we're empowering the community and helping to build new leaders, that we're strengthening those connections between folks, and that we have diverse housing options. So that's a little bit about the overview of some of the work that Liz has been doing in Everett. I'm going to share a video that we worked on with the community because I think it does such a good job of being able to talk about what the community's vision is for itself. And I'm going to believe that the sound is going to work.
Daniela is creating the future of Casino Road. Daniela and her neighbors are planning for what their families, businesses, and community need over decades to come. Streets where local businesses thrive and we can walk to the shops and services we need. Affordable homes where our families are secure long-term and we can pay for what we need. Parks alive with laughter and joy. Local jobs and easy ways to travel when we go to work and school. Sidewalks filled with excitement when we celebrate our cultures and history. We dream of a Casino Road where every person has good homes, good jobs, good health, and the chance to build a good life for themselves and their children's children. Together, let's create a community that belongs to all of us.
There we go. Okay. So I know some of you have already seen that video, but I love it so much just because I think it does a really good job of articulating the importance of the interdisciplinary work around creating healthy communities and all of the different pieces that it takes to create a vibrant community. And that we also are talking about people's children's children and the fact that people really want to stay rooted in that community for the long term, and that their children will be able to be living in the same neighborhood as they do now. So I wanted to just place a little bit of context around some of our work with the comprehensive plan update. Yorick and his team and some of the other city staff have been really excellent in their engagement with our overall work in South Everett, in particular in our work with the Affordable Housing Work Group, and really have appreciated their regular attendance, their ability to contribute and to have some really great and sometimes contentious dialogue. So we'll talk a little bit more about the comp plan update, but one thing I just wanted to place in context is that, you know, one of the main things that we are concerned about and wanting to plan for is the potential for displacement. And so I have here laid next to each other the map of the planned light rail stations, which you can see kind of create that triangle. And also the Puget Sound Regional Council's displacement risk map, with orange being the highest risk of displacement. And so we can see that, you know, the nodes where we have new transit stations also introduces this potential for opportunity in terms of access to jobs and being able to have better supports around transit, and also risk for the folks who live in the neighborhood now. So with that understanding and recognition, especially given that we've seen how some of this has impacted communities across Puget Sound, there's this real opportunity for us to do things differently here in Everett and to have learned from some of the mistakes that have happened in other communities and be able to be really intentional about how we look toward the future. Especially because I think we have a little bit of time. There's a sense of urgency, but there's also some time before construction starts where we can think about how our policies and how some of our land use policies can help to support that anti-displacement. So just a little bit about the Affordable Housing Work Group. Bobby Thompson's here today from the Housing Consortium. Liz and the Housing Consortium together after putting together the economic development agenda for the neighborhood. Because one of the primary concerns and priorities from the neighborhood was thinking about affordable housing, pulled together a work group of folks, developers, the city staff, nonprofit organizations that are engaged in affordable housing development, and really thinking about how are we looking at preserving existing units in the neighborhood? How are we looking at developing new affordable housing, and then advocating for equitable policies to be able to plan for this idea of like how we can try and stem displacement in the neighborhood with some of those like forward-thinking activities. So the comprehensive plan update obviously is like hugely important in the future of the growth of the city. And so we recognize as that process was moving along that the neighborhood in South Everett in particular, in Casino Road, they hadn't been very engaged in the process. And not because the staff didn't try, just because there's limited capacity, and this is a challenging community to be able to engage because we have a lot of factors that make it difficult for people to be civically engaged. That means, lots of folks who work maybe not, business time hours, folks who have young children who need childcare, people who speak a second language as their, other than English, as their primary language. And so really we wanted to think about how we could support the comprehensive planning process to be able to make sure that those voices from the community were heard, and that we could synthesize that feedback between not only residents, but also community leaders, and then provide a set of recommendations that could be integrated into the comprehensive plan. So I'll talk a little bit about, what some of our input has been so far. And I think the biggest thing is just, we're super proud of the fact that we were able to collaborate with Connect Casino Road and participate in one of their kind of existing kind of gatherings of the community. And we had, 60 people, mostly Latino residents, come out and be really engaged in being able to give us feedback and talk about not only what did they want to see in their neighborhood and what did they want to change, but what did they love about their neighborhood. It was really great to hear people feel connected to their community. They really appreciate the small businesses that they feel like serve their needs. They really care about their public schools. And they feel this sense of just community and connectedness that that's really important. And I think it's really important for us to think about that as something that's worth preserving. I think that for folks who don't live in Casino Road, I think there's lots of times that we see a lot of negative press. And I have heard a number of people say, well, as soon as people have an opportunity to earn more money, they'll leave the neighborhood because you would only want to be there because you had to be there. And while I think that is probably true that some people do move out of the neighborhood when they have the opportunity to do so, there's also a lot of people who really feel connected and want to stay there. And so I think it's really important that we recognize that. So we worked to hear feedback from the Connect Casino Road Village Circle, which is the social service agency staff who represent the community-based organizations that work at the village. We also got feedback from the Affordable Housing Work Group. We had lots of good dialogue with the City of Everett planning staff. And then, as I mentioned, this event in October that had 60 residents. The event was conducted in Spanish with simultaneous translation in English. We had stations around the room and people shared their ideas through Post-its, which was super fun. Our feedback topics included community assets, as I mentioned, transportation, housing, economic development, parks and open space, and then other community needs. I think just recently I have finally pulled together all of the raw data and have started sharing it out with some of the city staff and departments, because I think there's such rich feedback there that hopefully we can use to inform not only the comp plan update, but also other planning efforts. So the key recommendations that came out of this work, which was led by FutureWise, were kind of these 6. There's lots of detail. There's maybe a couple of more kind of smaller recommendations, but these are the main recommendations that we have been talking about and sharing with city staff and are hoping will be integrated into the comprehensive plan, and really focused on South Everett in particular. So making sure that anti-displacement policies are clearly articulated and called out in the housing goals, and thinking about that overlay of anti-displacement as opposed to solely equity, because I think there was some parts of the comp plan that talked about like being concerned about the concentration of low-income housing, and recognizing that the way that policy was worded also might be in conflict with this idea of allowing people to be staying in their community because of the market forces around some of the not income restricted housing. 2, making sure that we're working with churches and other faith-owned institutions and nonprofit organizations to provide them with incentives for redevelopment of their properties. We know that there are a number of churches within the city of Everett who may have more land than they currently need, or maybe their congregations have shrunk and so they do not need as much sanctuary space. So how do we work with them to be able to envision what it could look like to redevelop their properties, whether that means sale or partnership with a nonprofit developer, or maintaining ownership and thinking about what housing options there are. So just making sure that we're thinking about what those incentives should be and that we're calling that out in the comprehensive plan. Ensuring a diversity of housing options. So that includes, really thinking about whether or not there could be incentives for family size rental units. We know, especially in immigrant communities, that lots of times people live in extended families. And so how are we planning for that? Also allowing co-living and exploring adapting the building code, in particular about the central stairway, I think was one of the things that has been challenging around some smaller buildings. So just looking at like, how are we making sure that the comprehensive plan update is encouraging and allowing for a variety of living options for folks. Another thing you saw in the earlier map that I presented from the Puget Sound Regional Council is adopting anti-displacement designation, which allows us to just focus some specific policy work around those high risk displacement areas. So using that as a framework for future policy work. I think the biggest topic that we spent a lot of time talking about is adopting inclusionary zoning, and really thinking about how inclusionary zoning could be aligned with the county policies that are just, to the unincorporated area to the southeast. And to make sure that as new housing is developed, that we are also ensuring that there are affordable units included in those new buildings, so that as redevelopment happens, we don't lose the opportunity for folks who want to stay in the neighborhood to be able to have access to affordable units. So, there was a lot of thought and I think and good conversation around inclusionary zoning, and we think that it's really an important tool to ensure that there's continues to be affordable housing in the neighborhood. And then sub-area planning, which I think is already part of the long-term plan for the city, but is really thinking about how are we looking at those station areas and thinking about if there are specific policies that need to be adopted to ensure equitable transit-oriented development, and that we really maximize the promise that light rail can bring in terms of ensuring opportunity and access for everybody who currently lives in the neighborhood to benefit from those changes. And that's it. I'm happy to take questions. I'm also happy to have Yorick, provide his thoughts or responses.
I'll tell you what I have. So I went through the whole list and there is a more detailed memo from LISC and Housing Consortium and FutureWise that we discussed with the Planning Commission. And I went through piece by piece and kind of what we did in response to it. So I have all of that available, but you may have questions just in general on Tina's presentation to cover first or a different direction. Up to you.
Well, I have one question about the central stairway issue. Can you explain that?
Well, I'm gonna let you were talking about that.
As I understand it, in the building code, there's a requirement for 2 egress stairways for buildings over a certain size or height. Over 3 stories. Thank you. I knew Alice knew the answer there. That is a American building code requirement that results in some buildings that maybe are not as efficient as they could be in terms of both number of apartments that you can fit in there and their relationship to the outside and windows and cross breezes and all the kinds of things that you would never expect a stairway to relate to. There's a movement among the planning and building community to take a second look at that and whether it really delivers the fire safety results that we're looking for, because it does incur costs in terms of housing cost and different layouts and everything. Some cities are moving to amend the standard code to allow single stairs. It's very common in other countries, but pretty new in the United States. I think Seattle's had it for years. Seattle, we think, has had it for years. And that's something that I know the state is looking at, directing the Building Code Council to make some changes to. And I assume if Seattle was able to do it, that maybe it's something that Everett could look at, although maybe we're in a different class too.
That's something that we're going to get input from Dave DeMarco on. I know for years we were enforcing that requirement against buildings that didn't have the 2 stairways.
We do currently, and there's nothing in the works to change that. If we were to change it, we would definitely want fire building at the forefront.
Yeah, I guess from my standpoint, I mean, I'm familiar with building codes and their development from several decades of involvement in this, and those things are usually written because of ghastly occurrences that show the weakness of a previous standard. So I guess I will look for others for expertise on that. One other question with respect to larger families or integrated families. I know just across the street from this, the Four Corners development, I think there are up to 5 bedroom units there, and in a place fairly near me in Southeast Everett, there are a bunch of them there as well. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because that does seem to be the trend on a lot of these.
I know that across Washington, we do not have enough family size units in general. It's a huge need, and 5 bedrooms is quite unusual. I'd say like lots of people call 2 bedrooms family size units. I know that in Seattle, one of our partners, the Seattle Chinatown International District Public Development Authority, just built a building where they had 4 bedroom units, which included a 1 bedroom with an ensuite bath that was really meant to be for grandparents and a family. So this idea of just intergenerational household and being able to plan for that for rental is difficult to do, especially for affordable housing from some of the funding sources, but a really important priority.
Okay, because it does sound like it's beginning to happen. I mean, I'm not sure what the drivers were on those 2 developments.
Yeah, I'd love to learn more.
To add on to that, I remember a few years ago, and I think it's state law that we ended up talking about at the city level, and I think it has to do with how many people just in general are allowed within a home, within a unit, regardless of how many bedrooms there are. And I just remember having a big conversation about, well, are they related or this or that? And the other thing is that law part of this conversation as well when it comes to intergenerational and or just a lot of people being able to live affordably in a unit. And does that type of thing go into the comp plan, or is that what? So talk about that a little bit, if you might.
I mean, it is one of the recommendations is this idea of co-living and re-examining that and thinking about the role that it plays. I think especially when we think about you know, how isolating it can be for low income folks and how challenging it is for folks to find affordable units, even if you think about studios. The idea of being able to be in a shared living space where you have mutual support and can share expenses, I think can be really important. And this idea of like being able to be connected with your community in that way too. So I don't know if you want to talk more about that, York, but it was one of the recommendations.
I know, Councilmember Bogley, I think what you're remembering is discussion of the number of people who can live together who may or may not be related.
Yeah.
As it pertains to the definition of single family for purposes of single family
Right.
zoning. And I forget the nuances of that, but I think that's where that discussion arose.
And I remember
Those limits.
from college-ish times and friends living in the big yellow house, you know, it's a single family house with 5 bedrooms and it's old and it's affordable and 5 different families live there.
Yeah, I thought we removed those limits a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
We did.
Yeah.
We did.
We removed all that. So.
Yep. So it
Great,
is-
we don't need to fix that then.
Yes, it's an important.
Fantastic.
An important part of the equation. There was a state law that required that we remove those limits on unrelated persons in a dwelling. So right now they are removed. There are building code and fire code requirements around safe sleeping quarters and all that. But that's what that would be.
Yay.
Great. I was curious about the recommendation to adopt PSRC's designations on, or anti-displacement designations on future land use maps. That's a notion I haven't heard of yet, so I was hoping you could expand on that, or
Yeah, do
what
you
that
wanna-
means and how it works.
Talk a little bit about
Yeah.
your thinking on that.
Should we go to what it is?
Sure.
Too. So PSRC did some work a couple of years ago around identifying areas of high displacement risk, displacement being kind of economic or direct construction eviction factors that cause a household not to be able to stay in a neighborhood in which they live. So it can be either your rental unit has been demolished and you got to go and maybe you can't find another place that you can afford, or the rents have gone up or the housing prices or whatever to where you're no longer able to stay. PSRC put some numbers to that, and there are 12 indicators across neighborhood characteristics, transportation qualities, sociodemographics that are related or would indicate a risk of displacement. And then they put the map that we saw earlier, shows the high displacement risk areas, which are the census tracts in the region in the top 10% of all of those indicators. Tend to be places, it's things like household income is relatively low, but there are higher income tracts around it. That there are a large population of renters, linguistic isolation, lower educational attainment prevalent in the area, but good access to jobs, good proximity to transit, proximity to future light rail, and proximity to civic infrastructure and core businesses. So those are all the indicators that tell us that there's a risk of future displacement, and all of those light up for South Everett. The question is how to reflect that in our work, and whether we want to put the map in the plan, talk about displacement in the plan, have policies and countermeasures identified and all of that. We haven't finished writing the urban form element and the housing element, the text and the maps that go along with it. So we haven't finalized what maps will be proposed to go in there, but we do have the goals and policies, and those were part of the early draft council package. And we do talk about displacement, especially in the housing element. And we identify the risk of displacement and talk about addressing and mitigating that risk of displacement. So far we don't have the map in there, but I think it would be a reasonable thing to have somewhere, or at least referenced in the plan.
I do want to add too that when we talk about displacement, you know, there's a variety of forms of displacement and we have been primarily focused on housing displacement, thinking about residents. We also want to, I think when you think about a community and maintaining the fabric of the community, you think about institutions. Because we know that, you know, institutions like churches and nonprofit organizations that serve communities are also an important part of community. And then also small businesses. And we know that one of the things that we heard from the feedback from the community was how important it was to them that they could get so many of their needs met locally, that they knew and had relationships with the small business owners, that they could speak their language with the small business owners. And so I think that's one place that is kind of like next on my personal priority list, is really thinking about, okay, we are trying to address some of the potential policies that can help with residents displacement. And so what are we doing to think about the small businesses, and how do we retain those small businesses? Because we need all of those different components for communities to be healthy and to be vibrant and to work for folks. So I think there's some work to be done that is outside of the comprehensive plan update itself, but around thinking about how you provide, stabilized rent for small businesses, how you make sure that you build strong and robust businesses that can, attract new customers when new people come to the neighborhood, and also that they can weather some of the construction impacts that are coming.
Included in that, would there be requirements for developers to mitigate any displacement due to a new building that might be market rent, or would that be part of inclusionary zoning where they would have to provide a certain percentage of units for at a particular income level?
Yeah, I think that, Yura can talk a little bit more about that, but was part of our discussion about inclusionary zoning, was really thinking about, there's like a map that you'll see at some point, but that we drew, where we're also thinking about making sure that if there are new developments along the commercial corridor, where we really want to see more density of housing, that you wouldn't only just redevelop commercial space and retail space only, but you would also think about housing on top to increase the number of units available. That's one of the other things that we're thinking about too, is, where there are opportunities for transit-oriented development, if we're partnering with nonprofit partners, what does the commercial space look like for that? And are there opportunities to have, a master lease, or to think about designing for some of the tenants who could be displaced by some of the construction? How are we thinking about community land trust, or community investment trust, where we can have community ownership of commercial property to be able to maintain rents and the kinds of businesses that the neighborhood really wants to see. So I think it's complicated, and there's additional resources and thinking that are needed, but that is definitely something kind of on our to-do list, because I think it's really, really important.
Great.
With going in, okay, speaking to faith-based folks and the property that they may or may not have with housing, is it possible, I'm wondering, is the zoning inclusionary when it comes to, could their property also be commercial if they decided to work with the city and the community? I'm just thinking of this really big, humongous couple of parking lots on Casino, and I think we've talked about them a couple of times, but it just was like, oh yeah, so is it within the realm of possibility in our laws to have commercial and housing on what is currently a church parking lot? Not that it's happening, but like, is it possible?
I hear Allison saying yes.
Okay, so I just wanted to put, I don't know how
Your
church zones work.
Depends on which, it depends on which church.
Church
So
zone?
here's kind of a zoom on South Everett. The orange, which is most of sorry, the orange, which is UR7, is most of Casino Road, West Casino Road. There are a couple nodes of mixed use, mainly at intersections where there was a current neighborhood business zone and cluster. I think the churches you're referring to are not that.
Yeah, what's
so
light
they are
yellow?
UR7, light yellow, and our neighborhood residential. That's our
Okay.
middle housing zone. UR7 is residential and up to 7 floors. We have the neighborhood commercial framework that we're working on that would allow small scale, neighborhood oriented, non-residential or commercial, establishments on corners up to 3,000 square feet with limited hours and a limited set of uses, and it could be up to the whole first floor of a multi-story building is how we currently have that set up. As part of this work, the work that Tina's been describing, one of the recommendations was to think carefully about available commercial opportunities along Casino Road. Most of this, where you see it orange, is existing pretty much the same zoning as now. It's UR4, which is a multifamily zone up to 6 floors on the Casino Road. So 1 extra floor with this proposed new zoning, but it already restricts commercial from all of those. So if it's on a corner, if you get 3,000 square feet or the ground floor of a multi-story building, that neighborhood commercial framework is still up for modification. And this is one where, you know, one thing that comes to mind with Casino Road is that there are not many corners. The 2 public road corners that are kind of within Fifth, and there's another one there, do have mixed use zoning. It's where the gas station and a couple restaurants and things are. But other than that, along the rest of the road, all of the kind of intersections are with private roads and like the big apartment condo complexes. I think we would interpret that that would be a corner. So you would allow it on some of those. But that's the kind of thing that I think through this work, they've identified like, hey, you currently don't allow small scale commercial in most of Casino Road. The neighborhood commercial concept will help somewhat, but is it enough?
Yeah. I would just say too, and I assume that you all are pretty familiar with that, but it is a long stretch of no commercial. So, you know, and a lot of folks walk. And so, and we also know that the pedestrian environment isn't super. So thinking about whether or not there are opportunities to increase some small scale retail along that stretch, I think will be helpful, especially as we continue to increase density around light rail stations.
Staff is wide open to it, so we're looking for direction on that. I don't think having the whole thing be mixed use, because there are a lot of uses that maybe you wouldn't want in there, but we're open to ideas.
I had a question. I guess it was probably a couple of years ago, some of the earlier discussions about affordable commercial space and the lack of protections on that, because we're talking here about allowable, what would work in the zoning, but if I understand correctly, things like the community land trust or similar things like that are one of the only ways long-term to ensure that affordability.
That's correct.
For commercial space, yeah, it's a lot harder. We've been with the light rail, and there's also a model code partnership kind of work effort centered on anti-displacement and positive community placekeeping and community building in this area because of the coming light rail stations. They've also been, well, wrestling with the potential direct displacement of Casino Square from one of the light rail station alternatives, and trying to find solutions for that. And it is really difficult because at the end of the day, it's a for-profit business. So things that you do to support that, ultimately, if things are going right, turn into profit for someone. So it's a little bit different than housing, where we're more flexible on the incentives that we can provide.
Yeah, because the ownership of Casino Square is elsewhere,
Right.
not in our community now, but there are some underused on the opposite side of Casino Road, the south side of Casino Road. There's some underused spaces there. And I guess, have you been working with Kroger, Fred Meyer, their efforts in any of this sort of thing?
I have not directly engaged Kroger or Fred Meyer, in part just because it's hard to do that. I mean, I did try a while ago to see if we could paint a mural on their building, and they weren't able to get back to me on it. So I think that our best bet is to work on identifying some specific parcels that are, as you said, underutilized or going to be in the footprint of some of the staging, and think about whether or not we can acquire some of those and then what does that look like? What does redevelopment look like? And who are the partners around that? I think one of the other things that I'll just, as an aside, is, there is not a ton of capacity of, economic development and affordable housing organizations to be able to take on some of these complex and very large projects. Housing Hope is amazing and has their hands full. EHA is working on its own stuff. And so so part of this too is like the recognition that, we are trying to bring some capacity to the community and also building capacity within the community to be able to hold some of this work and to be able to lead and champion it. Because right now there's not anybody for whom it's their main job or mission. And so how do we start to get the focus that's needed to be able to advance some of these things that we want to see happen in the neighborhood?
Okay, I used to live on Casino Road and I walked Fred Meyer all the time, so I have a sense of the utility of that. Didn't spend as much time in Casino Square, but I guess it would seem to me, though I haven't contacted Fred Meyer either or Kroger either, that there is some useful synergy there in them having a more active, more functional, more profitable, more income commercial space there to integrate that, especially where they don't have control over what happens at Casino Square.
And the more space is utilized, the less it's utilized for nefarious reasons.
Yeah,
So-
certainly the triangle there has been troublesome, and it would be nice if that were not only not troublesome, but really profitable. I guess the only other point, I don't want to dominate this here, the only other point, the comment about allowing housing above a bunch of the other retail seems like that's easier to do, meaning that can take advantage of existing development capacity and interest that way, and increase density and hopefully ensure the profitability that makes it workable without special measures.
And I'm just so glad that we have had a champion down there because, yes, I live there. Sure, I'm District 4, but I'm not you. And the capacity that that LISC has been able to put forward and really get people involved is more than wonderful. And so I hope that people that have been working with you in that environment maybe might even be ready to step up and champion some other things, maybe even in this room. And it would be great.
Yeah, thank you.
I had a couple of questions. There's conversations that are perfect segues for my questions. I was curious about Sound Transit's role in this as well, and if there are requirements that they have to follow for mitigating displacement, and then also if there's anything that can be embedded in the comp plan to force that or require it. I guess force is a terrible word to use, but I'll just say encourage or yeah. And I think I have another question about that offline about trees, but we'll save that for another.
I can just say that, we have a really good relationship with Sound Transit and have been really regularly briefing them on all of the work that we've been doing, sharing some of the feedback we've been getting from the community. We've done a tour with them. So I think they are super interested in, well, I also will just say, I think they're listening to the community and really wanting to be responsive in the station, location, design, and I really appreciate that because I think it has taken them a long time to get to this level of openness, given some of my work in a very long time ago with them. So we are regularly in touch with them and talking about some of the parcels that we think are interesting, talking about transit-oriented development opportunities, talking about leveraging some of their resources, and then also trying to think creatively about, they're going to have to acquire parcels that are not going to be, constructed upon for the guideway and the station that are part of staging or other things that will be surplus later. And so are there some creative ways that we can work with them on that? And so, yeah, and I would anticipate that as construction gets closer, then there will be an opportunity for the community and an economic development organization, whether that's LISC or in collaboration with others, to negotiate the mitigation package for the small businesses. You know, that is something that is really specific to each community. And I have worked with them when we were doing mitigation for the Capitol Hill Light Rail Station. And so I know a little bit about kind of what some of the elements of that are. So that tends to come a little closer in when construction is coming. But I think continuing to think about, you know, what is it the community needs? What are the impacts going to be? It's going to be just an important part of the ongoing conversation with Sound Transit. Yeah.
Great. I'll say my other question because I wanted to give you more time to make sure that staying after work.
Yeah, no, and again, it's more of the same. So I have kind of some maybe too much detail on what we've done with the recommendations. I think for the most part, we've taken these recommendations come from a lot of care and a lot of thought and a lot of engagement with the community. So we kind of took them and for the most part implemented them. And you would see some of those in the early council draft package, especially some of the changes to the housing element. So we can go through that. It's maybe helpful to see how this stuff works and see some particular policies. But again, I suspect it's a little bit too detailed. So up to you with how we want to spend the rest of this time. If I think, yeah.
Your committee.
What?
It's up to you guys.
Give us too much information. Right now, all of it.
Since when do we not like the weeds?
Some of this you can peruse after the meeting, but what this is 3 documents. One is the memo that LISC Futurized Housing Consortium shared with the Planning Commission at the very end of last year. Then the second one is this document that I didn't put together today that is the specific comments and suggestions or requests out of this memo, which is what Tina summarized in the presentation. Middle column is the response. So where we are currently, and then some notes about it. So for example, the very first one, modify the goal to add in balance with the need for anti-displacement policies. You'll see the goal does not include that underline. So that first one, we thought that an important aspect of residents being able to choose their neighborhood is that they are able to choose to stay in the neighborhood. So we kind of felt that anti-displacement policies is covered in the goal in that way, and then also in other policies. This is an example. Did we get it right? We still have plenty of time to work through that. Maintain policies. Policies were mostly maintained about disproportionate impacts. There was one policy that we actually kind of backed off on a little bit that used to say, ensure that current and proposed regulations, policies, and procedures do not lead to disproportionate impacts on or displacement of marginalized populations. We were worried that ensure, when the city only has some control over the situation, was a little bit strong. So we moved that to minimize disproportionate impacts. The next one down, this concentration of low-income housing was a really interesting one. I think we have existing policy language around that. It sounds like something that you wouldn't want to do, concentrate low income. But I think Tina and the group made some really good points about if you go too far with deconcentration of affordable housing stock, you could lead to displacement because again, many folks would like to stay there.
Can I say one more thing about that? Because I think I think there's some nuance in all of this, right? So one, we do think that it's important for low income housing to be available in all communities, especially high opportunity communities. So from a sense of like the intent, I think of this, of the wording of this is that we don't want to concentrate all poor people in one neighborhood and have them not able to access things that are common in other neighborhoods, like good schools or good job opportunities or transit or those other things. What the discussion about this was really recognizing that there is much low income or affordable housing in this neighborhood that is not income restricted. And so there is a very high potential that there will be gentrification in the neighborhood and displacement in the neighborhood if we don't actively ahead of, that the real estate pressures, we don't actively create more income restricted affordable housing. And we talked a lot about, the central district in Seattle and what has happened there. And so it's this kind of nuanced recommendation that's really about a recognition of the potential for displacement and gentrification and trying to get out in front of that rather than a desire to concentrate poverty in a single neighborhood.
Well, and I've been talking with community transit about their microtransit, and so microtransit and paratransit, they've been having some great success that way. So some degree of concentration of people who would use transit will help get the transit there and help make the transit work there, because that's the way the microtransit has been working. And it sounds like they've had great success with that so far, that it's worked pretty efficiently and it's really serving people well.
Yeah, I think that was a good one to linger on a little bit because it, it sounds like just a policy, but these kinds of things trickle down into could be city actions, or the feeling is provided to our affordable housing providers that please don't cite your next project in this neighborhood. And that's how that could then have kind of backwards effects.
And that was the conversation that we
That was
had.
exactly it,
We
yeah.
said to Housing Hope, we really would like you to do some affordable housing work in South Everett, in particular along Casino Road. And they said, no, we have a policy against doing that. And so we had a really good conversation about why that was challenging for the neighborhood, given the current conditions and context.
Who has a policy against putting it there?
We don't anymore.
Okay.
But it was like Housing Hope was,
And
again,
every
in,
housing authority has this, has the same.
it's the same wording as is in the comment, which is avoiding concentrations of low income housing. And it's really meant to be ensuring that, I'm sure it's part of also addressing NIMBYism, right? Which is like, we're trying to make sure that there is housing at all income levels in all parts of the city. And that it's again, the intent and impact of some of policies and kind of really reflecting on that and thinking about the nuance.
Yeah.
So that is one, again, we're not done with this process, and if the council sees it differently than we've got it here, we'd love to hear that. Let's see, what's it for the first page? We talked about the displacement risk mapping. We do have a policy, HO 49, implement community preference strategies to support residents at risk of displacement, promoting neighborhood stability and equitable access to housing for vulnerable populations. So community preference strategies are some tenant opportunity to purchase, or some ways that's the Fair Housing Act one, right? Where you normally are not allowed to give preference to any class of people in renting an apartment, but maybe with some city actions, you can allow for someone who has historic ties to a neighborhood to get first preference for an affordable housing unit if it becomes available. How did I do there?
Yeah.
Okay. So a policy to look at doing something like that. There was a request to delay the zoning changes in South Everett while we incorporate some of these other, the inclusionary zoning and some of these other policies. As staff do not recommend doing that part, but we have been rushing to incorporate some of the things that the delay would have allowed time for, such as the inclusionary housing proposal, which you'll see in the next draft of the comprehensive plan materials, that we will have that. We do have a policy at the bottom of the second page, implement inclusionary zoning requirements in areas of the city subject to high displacement risk. So that is a policy in that early council draft housing element, HO 18. And we are busily working on following that up with the actual code language that would implement it. But as another example of how the words in a policy turn into action. And so if we should be doing something different than that policy, then that could affect what actions we take thereafter.
I want to add one other thing about the inclusionary zoning, and that is that the county has inclusionary zoning just adjacent to the map that we're using. So a lot of the discussion and recommendations are about just matching the existing multifamily tax exemption kind of requirements and then matching with what the county inclusionary zoning is, so that we're in line with, you know, the jurisdiction that's adjacent. And then also just putting in place an opportunity to review and revise the inclusionary zoning and evaluate it over time to make sure that it's doing the work we want it to be doing. Because I know there's big concerns about, you know, will it slow down development? Will it discourage development? And I think that the general research shows that it doesn't. And we should be open to examining it and determining if it's working for this community.
That's most of it. You can read through for some of the other details on there, but these changes are from the earlier draft to what is in your early council package. That third document is it is your early council package with some of the relevant policies highlighted. So think about what you've heard and whether we landed on the right spot along with our partners, and many thanks to Tina and to Bobby and the organizations that have been putting so much work in to really extend our reach into the engagement and the analysis and coming up with some good solutions here.
Great, very good. I was glad to see the outreach earlier to get the initial suggestions, and great turnout. And I was curious if there were plans to do a revisit of, you know, here's where we landed. Do we have your blessing? Just falling in the category of no decisions about us without us. Was checking to see that this would go back to the community to make sure that they have eyes on it.
Yeah, we have gone back to the Village Circle, and there are some upcoming meetings at Connect Casino Road. I think there's a recognition that a lot of this stuff is very wonky. And so wanting to make sure that whatever we go back to the community with, it is framed in a way that makes sense to folks and that has folks feel heard, and that we also don't like make their eyes glaze over with talking about, like, you know, single stair buildings. And so yes, 100%. Super important also to circle back and just let them know how their feedback was heard. One other thing, I just talked with Jacqueline from Sound Transit, because she's going to do some outreach, I think, in the next month or two. And she's going to do it at the Village. And so we talked about incorporating some of what we've heard in the outreach that she's doing, so that we're like not creating yet another meeting, but integrating it into some coming work. And the thing that's super exciting to me is that some of the things that the community's been asking for are already on the plans. So, like, you know, Everett Transit's already working on improving transit and adding new bus shelters, and the Parks Department's been super responsive in adding more trails. And so there's really good things that we can say that are in line with what people want.
Fantastic. Yeah, about 1 minute. Anybody has any last quick questions or comments?
Really appreciate the time.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Great, excellent presentation. Thanks for all your hard work. Great. With that, it is 5:59. We are adjourned.